Good morning. It is a great honor and a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank Gail Atterbury for inviting me and the Oregon Right to Life for having me. And this is just a demonstration. Oregon Right to Life is on the forefront of the movement to stop just viewing life issues from an American perspective. This is something that is global. And just to give you an idea, in the United States, we've had about 53 million abortions since the Roe v. Wade decision. In China, the Chinese Communist Party boasts that it has prevented 400 million births through the one-child policy. That's greater than the entire population of the United States. According to the Chinese Communist Party, they have about 13 million abortions a year. We have about 1 million. They have 13 million abortions a year, which comes out to about 35,000 a day, or close to 1,500 per hour. So in the hour that I'm going to be speaking to you, 1,500 Chinese babies will be aborted, many of them forcibly. So I'm going to be showing 3 videos today. One has to do with gendercide, the sex-selective abortion of baby girls. The second has to do with forced abortion in China. The third has to do with Chen Guangcheng, who is a hero in China, who has been detained for standing up against the one-child policy. And I'll be speaking between the videos, but I'd also like to leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So if we could have the first video, please, that'd be great.
Today, India and China eliminate more girls than the number of girls born in America every
year. The definition of genocide is a systematic and methodical extermination of a certain group. And the gendercide is that systematic and methodical extermination of a gender group.
Why are Indian households secretly and brutally eliminating daughters from their family system?
They just wet the cloth and they fold it like this and they put it on the face. So the child can't breathe. Immediately the child will die.
So 他当时就是用一个纸箱包着，其余多数是女婴，因为他们一般情况下就是有超生的。
But what this is an entire system, a social machinery that says we don't want females.
But the real problem started after I became pregnant. They started asking me for a sex determination. They wanted to know if the children are girls or boys. They started torturing me to get an abortion done. What should I do to save my daughters?
कि उसके सिर हिला के देखा तो वो तो यहाँ पे गले पे पूरा निशान पड़ा हुआ है। निशान पड़ने के बाद तब हमें फिर रोना पीटना, हमारे तो होश ही उड़ गए थे लड़की को देख के कि इसने मार कैसे दी।
如果按计划生育生的话，我就只能生2个。哎呀，反正在村子里都有专人搞这些工作的嘛。 就被他们知道我们在那里。
மனசுல அதை வச்சிருக்க கூடாது. பையனா இருந்தா வச்சுக்கலாம், பெண்ணா இருந்தா ஒழிச்சுக்கலாம். அப்படி இப்படி பிடிச்சா தேடி போச்சு. பிறந்த உடனே நானே பாசிப்படுவேன். மறுபடி பையனே இல்லை அப்படின்னு 8 குழந்தைங்களாட்டம் கொண்டு விட்டோம்.
So according to one UN estimate, 200 million girls have been selectively aborted. And the primary countries that are doing this are India and China, although it happens elsewhere. India and China share certain characteristics that lead to gendercide, and yet they're different in certain ways. What they share is a son preference. So in both India and China, people greatly prefer boys to girls. Boys in those cultures carry on the family name. Boys in those cultures do the bulk of the farming, for rural families. Boys in those cultures are the ones that take care of the parents in their old age. In both cultures, in India and China, when a woman and a man get married, the woman goes over to the man's family and often even lives with her in-laws. And then they support the man's family in their old age. So there's a saying in Asia that says that to raise a daughter is to water somebody else's garden. So that is the basis of son preference. And then in India, there are additional elements to it. Like, for example, a woman in India continues to face gendercide when she's getting married. There's something called dowry deaths or bride burnings, which I had thought were isolated incidents. They're not. They happen thousands and thousands of times every year, and they're not prosecuted. But if the husband's family feels that the dowry is not large enough, they can douse the woman with gasoline and just burn her to death. Another form of gendercide in India has, and you saw a couple of examples of this in the film, has to do with getting pregnant with a girl and refusing to abort her. So you saw the woman there, her name is Mitu, who said they were pressuring me to have a sex determination test to determine whether the children are girls or boys. She was pregnant with twins. So her husband, all right, so the husband and her in-laws were pressuring her to have an ultrasound to see if she was carrying girls or boys, because if she was carrying girls, they wanted her to abort them. She refused to have an ultrasound, so they locked her in a room and didn't feed her or give her anything to drink for 3 days. At the end of that time, knowing that she was allergic to eggs, they fed her a cake made with eggs, which she ate. And then when she became violently ill and was whisked away to the hospital, they persuaded a doctor there to give her an ultrasound when she was unconscious, which she did. They determined that the babies were girls. So when she returned home, they demanded an abortion. She refused to give an abortion. So her husband threw her down the stairs in an attempt to cause her to miscarry. She didn't miscarry. She escaped. She had the babies at her own parents' house, and is now trying to fight the Indian government because giving ultrasounds in order to determine the gender of a child in order to abort it is illegal. So she filed a lawsuit against the physician that did this. And she has had death threats. She has been threatened with rape, with everything else. The Indian legal system is not helping her in any way. So that is another form of gendercide, which is attempt to kill a woman who is pregnant with a girl for the refusal to abort. The other form of gendercide is to kill the woman after she's given birth to the girl. And that is what happened in that other case where you saw the husband and the wife, and they said that they went to see their daughter. They saw the red mark and saw that she was dead. And they said they couldn't believe he could just kill her. The story behind that is that she had given birth to a girl, and the husband was enraged and killed her. Now, under normal circumstances, these things are not prosecuted at all. In that case, he was prosecuted. He spent 2 weeks in jail. And he is now raising that daughter that he killed his wife for giving birth to her. So this is a horrific problem in India, but in China, the factor that India doesn't have is the one-child policy. Now, the gender ratio in India is about 112 girls born, and boys born for every 100 girls born. And that difference between 100 boys and 112 boys and 100 girls is due entirely to sex-selective abortion. There's no other way to get a gender ratio like that. However, in China, the average is 120 boys born for every 100 girls born. So there's an 8-person difference, an 8-girl difference. And that even larger skewed birth ratio is due to the pressure put on parents by the one-child policy, that if you're only allowed to have one child, or in the countryside, if your first child is a girl, you can have a second child, and everybody uses that as an opportunity to try for a boy, right? If you can only have one child or 2 children, then people want to make sure that their family has a boy, and that has led to a situation where there are now 37 million more men than women living in China today. The one-child policy causes more violence against women and girls than any other official policy on earth and any other official policy in the history of the world. And I will go through each of these in turn, but I just want to name them for you now. Number 1, forced abortion is violent. It happens up to the 9th month of pregnancy. Women are literally dragged out of their homes, strapped down to tables, forced to abort babies that they want. And sometimes the women themselves die along with their full-term babies. Number 2, forced sterilization. Number 3, infanticide. Number 4, gendercide, which we've already spoken about, the sex-selective abortion of baby girls, which leads to, number 5, human trafficking and sexual slavery because of the gender imbalance. And then number 6, female suicide. So I will go into all of these in turn quickly, but I just want to say that there is no greater women's rights issue in the world today than gendercide, the sex-selective abortion of 200 million baby girls, and forced abortion in China. Just because of the sheer numbers involved. There's 1.3 billion people living in China. 1 out of every 5 women in the world, 1/5 of the world's population, lives in China. And you put that together with India, and it comes out to more like 1/3 of the women in the world are suffering under this. So the question is, how come groups that say that they stand for women's rights are turning a blind eye to 200 million women who are not with us because of gendercide? And how come groups that say that they care about choice are doing nothing about forced abortion in China? Do they really care about choice? Do they really care about women's rights? All right, let's now run this next video about forced abortion in China. I'm a litigation attorney, and in the 90s, I represented a client who had escaped China. I represented her in her case for political asylum in the United States, and she had been forcibly sterilized. That was my introduction to the reality behind the one-child policy. In fact, China's one-child policy causes more violence against women and girls than any other official policy on earth. I call it China's war on women and girls. When I say forced abortion, I mean women are literally dragged out of their homes or off the streets. They can be jailed in family planning jail cells, forced to abort children that they want. And this can happen all the way up to the 9th month of pregnancy. Some of these forced abortions are so violent that the women themselves die along with their full-term babies. One case that I'll never forget is of a young woman who was 7 months pregnant without a birth permit. So that would be an illegal pregnancy, who was walking down the street, and she was grabbed by family planning cadres, dragged off the street, strapped down to a table, forced to abort the baby that she very desperately wanted. And in the end, one of the medical personnel came to her with the body of her aborted baby and said, "You need to pay for this so that we can dispose of the body." And she said she didn't have any money, so they just laid that body right next to her in the bed. And I've got a photograph of her looking down and just grieving the loss of this 7-month-old baby that was forcibly aborted. It does not matter whether you are pro-choice or pro-life on this issue. No one supports forced abortion because it's not a choice. And this violence must stop. My goal in establishing women's rights without frontiers is to end forced abortion and sexual slavery in China. And to that end, I have testified before Congress, I've addressed the European Parliament, briefed the White House. When I started this several years ago, no one was talking about the one-child policy. And now, because of the documentation that has been generated, two things have happened. Number one, the Chinese Communist Party cannot deny that the one-child policy is enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and infanticide. And number two, it seems that almost everybody is talking about it at this point. It's become a household issue. Stop the violence. End China's war on women. Forced abortion is not a choice. So, China's one-child policy causes more violence against women and girls than any other official policy on earth or any other official policy in the history of the world because of the sheer numbers involved. So we've seen what is involved with forced abortion. This is happening right up till now. In fact, we have Stephen Erteld here, sitting here. He's going to be speaking next. I would encourage you to go to his talk. But just about 2 weeks ago, he ran an article on Life News about a woman who was forcibly aborted at 9 months. The baby was born alive, came out crying, and they just put it in a bucket to drown it. And then the picture of the baby in the bucket was leaked out of China and caused a huge stir inside of China. People who travel to China come back and say that either that the one-child policy is not enforced coercively anymore, or that the population of China really kind of agrees with it and it's okay. But understand that people are not free to talk about this. China is a brutal totalitarian regime. People talk about the Chinese government like they talk about the American government. Well, the difference between the Chinese government and the American government is that the Chinese government was never elected. They just took over. And they have been repressing the Chinese people ever since they got into power. I spoke to somebody the other day and said, well, it's not up to me to second guess what their government does. It's like, well, why not? They weren't elected. They just took over. Their people have no power to dissent on anything. And people say to me sometimes, why is it that you are so passionate about this issue? I mean, why don't you just let the Chinese people handle it themselves? Well, the reason for that is that when Chinese people try to raise their voice against these things, bad things happen to them. One of the primary examples is Chen Guangcheng. He is a blind attorney who has stood up to help women who are victims of the one-child policy. And he has been beaten, tortured, detained, and is now hanging on to life by a thread under horrible house arrest, where he's been denied food and is suffering from a debilitating medical condition that will cost him his life if he doesn't get immediate medical attention. So I'd like now to play the video about Chen Guangcheng. Chen Guangcheng is the tank man against the one-child policy. Chen is blind, and yet it has taken a blind man to see the truth behind the brutal one-child policy. Chen is the one who exposed the fact that there were 130,000 forced abortions and forced sterilizations in Linyi County, just one county, in 2005. For that, he served a 4-year, 3-month jail sentence, during which time he was beaten, tortured, and denied medical treatment. He nevertheless possesses the surpassing backbone to stand up against this totalitarian regime. The Chinese Communist Party perceives this as a real threat to its crumbling legitimacy. In September of 2010, he was released from prison in an extremely weakened physical state. But he went to a larger prison, which was the prison of his own home. In fact, the entire village has become like a giant prison.
What we're trying to do here is to get through. This man has no authority.
那么我们现在迫切需要做的一件事情就是战胜恐惧，来揭露他们这种没有人道、没有基本良知这么一系列的见不得人的行为。这个录像的公布呢，我也有思想准备，他们可能用对付高志胜的手段来对付我，但是我不怕。
如果那个时候我和光成都会遇到一些非常危险的，不能照顾我们两个。 就是我的2个孩子客死的话，我还是希望朋友能帮我，让我们照顾一下这2个孩子。
After the release of this video to the West, he and his wife were beaten senseless and left on their beds, unable to go to the hospital. Join in the fight to free Chen Guangcheng. Sign the petition. Send a message to the Chinese Communist Party that Chen Guangcheng and his wife must be freed immediately. And send a message to Chen Guangcheng and his family. Chen, we want you to know you are not forgotten. We are fighting for you, and we will not stop until you are free. Chen Guangcheng is one of the greatest women's rights warriors on the face of the earth. And Women's Rights Without Frontiers is leading the international campaign to free him. So something that you can do to help is by signing the petition to free Chen Guangcheng, which is down here. You can also help by signing the petition against forced abortion, which is also down here. And please be very clear with your email address. What's going to happen is if I get your email address, then you will start to get newsletters from Women's Rights Without Frontiers, and you can keep abreast of what's happening in China. So, forced abortion is violence against women. Forced sterilization, as I mentioned, my client was forcibly sterilized. That's how I found out about all these issues. That was in the mid-90s, and I knew that China had a one-child policy. I did not realize that it was currently enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and infanticide. With respect to infanticide, Women's Rights Without Frontiers got what I call a smoking gun document. I presented it to the U.S. Congress. It's called Best Practices Infanticide. It's a web-based discussion among Chinese obstetricians and gynecologists about how best to kill infants who are being born alive during late-term induced labor forced abortions, and it's on my website. Gendercide, the sex-selective abortion of baby girls, has led to a gender imbalance in which there are 37 million more men than women living in China today, and that is the driving force behind human trafficking and sexual slavery, not only within China, but from the surrounding countries. Now, within China, we saw an example of that little girl who was trafficked in the first film. What happened with that is, because parents who've had a child, particularly a boy, cannot get permission to have another child, and they're also worried that their boy is not going to be able to marry because there aren't enough women, what they will do, and what happened in the case of that little girl, is they will actually traffic a girl into their families to raise her there as a future bride for their son. And that girl was found in a neighboring village being raised in another family as the future bride for their son. And then in other cases where the families have a girl already, the boys are trafficked because they want a boy in their family to carry on the family name and farm the land, etc. So there's the one-child policy causes a huge market for both boys to be trafficked and girls to be trafficked. That's internal Chinese trafficking. Then externally, this vacuum that is created by the 37 million extra men is being filled by international human trafficking, so that girls and women are being trafficked into China from many of the surrounding countries, including North Korea, Taiwan, Burma, Thailand, Mongolia, and even as far away as Romania. Finally, female suicide. China has the highest female suicide rate of any country in the world. According to the World Health Organization, 500 women a day end their lives in China. The majority of these are in the countryside. And the way that they end their lives in the countryside usually is by drinking pesticides, which is a very slow and painful way to die. So imagine the emotional and spiritual pain these women are in order to do that to themselves. In the United States, when women have abortions, they have post-abortion counseling. In China, women are forcibly aborted. They are fined for the abortion. To get pregnant without a birth permit is a criminal act, so they are criminals. And they don't have post-abortion counseling available to them. So I think that there is likely a link between the trauma of that and the lack of resources to help them and this extraordinary female suicide rate that we have in China. So Women's Rights Without Frontiers has a two-pronged approach to addressing this. Number one, we've been called the leading voice in the world to expose and oppose forced abortion in China. And I am the expert on the one-child policy for an organization called the China Aid Association. They serve the persecuted underground church in China. And so I get information leaked out of China through them. They give it to me, and I present it in reports all over the world. This is very important for especially decision makers to know about this, political decision makers, because we are underwriting this indirectly, financially, by the U.S. using taxpayer money, your money and my money, to fund the UNFPA, that's the United Nations Family Planning Fund, and International Planned Parenthood. Both of these organizations have been working hand in hand with the Chinese Communist Party population control machine for 30 years. They say that they are promoting voluntarism. Well, I don't see it. And if they really are promoting voluntarism, then how come in April of 2010, when there was a 20-day forced sterilization campaign in Puning City, Guangdong Province, which was published in the London Times, and I wrote a press release about it, Life News, and Stephen Urtel, we all were publicizing this. It was very, very well known that this was happening. So how come when they were trying to sterilize 9,500 people forcibly in Puning City, UNFPA and IPPF said nothing? If they are promoting voluntarism, whatever they're doing is not effective. And this is why it's important for people to know in the West. That's why I'm telling this to the United States Congress and the British Parliament and the Irish Parliament and the European Parliament and anywhere else that will invite me, because these people need to know what they're voting for when they vote for UNFPA and IPPF. Now, the second thing that we're doing is we're just starting a program now to actually assist victims of the one-child policy. So I have people inside of China who are identifying women either who are illegally pregnant so we can help them have their babies, or who are pregnant with girls and who are getting pressured to either abort or to leave their infant exposed, to give them money every month to help them keep their daughters. So between those two things, that's what we're doing with Women's Rights Without Frontiers. We're doing the expose and oppose on a governmental level, and we're helping the victims within China. And then the other thing that I'm doing, it does not have anything to do with Women's Rights Without Frontiers, but I've written a film called Pearls of China. It's a feature-length drama about a young couple that gets pregnant without a birth permit, and their attempt to escape the forced abortion that's required under the Chinese one-child policy. And the screenplay has won a bunch of awards, including first place in the adventure and action category. So as soon as we get our funding, we have development funding, but we need production funding. That film will be made, and I think that that will be probably even more effective than everything else I've been doing put together, because there's nothing that penetrates people's hearts and minds and spreads wider than a feature-length adventure and action drama. So just pray for that, okay? Because it's hard to get production funding these days. You got to pray for people to put their money down and invest in that project. So please feel free now to ask questions. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. Yes, the question is, does the fact that so many women are killing themselves also impact the gender ratio in China? And the answer to that is yes. 5 women a day are being depleted from the Chinese population due to that. And who knows how many women are permanently disabled. I mean, if you drink pesticides and don't die, you're still not going to be the same person when you're done with that process. So all these attempted suicides are also depleting the Chinese population of women. Well, in the U.S. Congress, I think that they whacked the UNFPA by at least $10 million last year. So we're still financing them, but there is some pushback on that to not finance them at the same level. Then it was interesting because when I spoke at the European Parliament the first time, I was on a panel, and the head of the panel was a communist, atheist, anarchist from Italy. And this whole thing was televised, and I gave my talk about forced abortion in China, and at the end of it he said, you know, when I heard you were coming, I felt a little bit uneasy about what you might say, because I'm passionately pro-choice, but after having heard what you've said, because I am pro-choice, I now oppose forced abortion in China. And that just made my day. When people hear the truth, if they care about the truth, and they don't have some other agenda, if they actually care about the truth, they will oppose this. And if they don't oppose it, then they don't care about the truth. They have another agenda. Have I been personally threatened because of my stand? I have not been personally threatened because of my stand. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, I'm not Chinese. And number 2, I use a pen name. Yes. Question is, how do Taiwan and Hong Kong figure into this? Well, they figure into it in very different ways. Now, Taiwan is not under the Chinese Communist regime. Okay, they separated themselves from China, and they don't have the one-child policy. And interestingly enough, their birth ratios are as bad or worse than in China. So at least in terms of I'm not sure about gender ratios, but in terms of their fertility rate, it's extremely low. And then in terms of Hong Kong, rich people in China can try to escape. Rich people in China can do a couple of things. Number one, they can buy their way out of the policy. And this is something I should say. For those of you who've been to China, and if you have asked a Chinese tour guide, I understand that you have forced abortion in China, you will likely get an answer that goes something like this. Forced abortion is illegal in China, and if you want to have a second child, all you have to do is pay a fine. Is there anybody here who's gone to China and heard that kind of a formulation? Yeah, okay. Okay, those statements are both extremely misleading. Number one, to say that forced abortion is illegal in China is to say that under the Chinese Constitution, the Constitution protects human rights, including in the context of family planning. All right? It's not enforced, number one. And number two, the local regulations require forced abortion. If you get down to the local level, the regulations will say all out-of-plan pregnancies shall be terminated. And they have abortion and sterilization quotas, so that each province, down to each city, down to each town, has a certain number, a target number of abortions that they need to have and sterilizations that they need to have. And in fact, this whole forced sterilization campaign that I mentioned that went on in Puning City was as a result of that the town had been considered to be lax in their family planning, and officials are either promoted or demoted depending on whether they meet these family planning targets. So they wanted to be promoted, so they forcibly sterilized 9,500 people. So that's not true, that it's illegal in China. It depends on what law you're looking at, whether it's the Constitution or the local regulations. And then they'll say, all you have to do is pay a fine if you want to have a second child. Well, for an American, when they hear the word fine, they think traffic violation, speeding ticket, $275, ouch, That's not what they mean by a Chinese fine. These fines, according to the United States Department of State, can be up to 10 times a person's annual salary. So just think of what your annual salary is, and think of whether you could pay 10 times that amount on an emergency basis in order to keep your baby. Now, if you're really rich, you might be able to do it, but 99% of the population isn't wealthy enough to do that. What's left to them? Forced abortion. I saw a question over here. Okay, can I verify that President Obama has condoned the one-child policy and that Vice President Biden verified that in China? Okay, I would not put it exactly that way. Now, in terms of President Obama condoning the one-child policy, what I can say is this. He immediately restored the UNFPA funding, which Secretary of State Colin Powell had found that the UNFPA was complicit in forced abortion in China, and that's why under the Bush administration they had cut it off. So by restoring it, you can say that he certainly doesn't have a problem with it. Now, in terms of Vice President Biden's remark, that was very interesting because he was in China and he said, I fully understand your one-child policy and do not second-guess it. That's the quote of what he said. So what that means is that he fully understands that the one-child policy is enforced through forced abortion. He fully understands that it is enforced through sterilization. He fully understands that it is enforced through infanticide. He fully understands the fact that there are now 37 million more men than women because of gendercide. He fully understands that is driving human trafficking in China. He fully understands that women are killing themselves in epidemic numbers in China, and yet he doesn't second guess it. What does that mean? If it's not okay in the United States, it's not okay in China either. And I took him to task on that, and a number of other people did as well. And the Obama administration offered a clarification, which was really a retraction. And I'm very happy about that because 5 years ago, if that had happened, it would not have made the news at all. And now it's made headlines. Why is it? It's because people have been pounding on this issue for 5 years to the extent that he touched a big nerve that really went off when he said that. And I'm just happy that the issue has reached that level of visibility. Yes? Okay, that is a great question. The Chinese government, okay, the question is, how does the Chinese government explain the necessity of this? All right? Okay. They say that they need the one-child policy because they're worried about a population explosion. Okay? Now, in my opinion, that's a lie. I'll tell you why I think it's a lie. The one-child policy was instituted in 1979, 1980 because under the Mao era, Chairman Mao had said that people are the strength of China, and he encouraged women to have as many kids as they could. The average fertility rate per woman under Mao was 6 children per woman. So at that time, you could say, arguably, that China was enduring a population explosion, although I think Chairman Mao took care of a lot of that with the Great Leap Forward and the forced march and everything else. I mean, many, we don't even know how many millions of people died from that. But in any case, arguably, they say that they were having a population explosion, and then in the Deng era, they established the one-child policy. Their fertility rate is now 1.2 children, or maybe 1.2 to 1.5 children per woman, which is below replacement rate. This has caused 2 demographic problems. Number one, the demographic problem of the gender side, the gender imbalance, the 37 million more men than women, which has created things that are called bachelor villages out in the countryside. Because there are fewer women than men, there's a premium on women, so women from the poor rural villages are migrating to the cities and towns and marrying there because that's the way that they can improve their lives. So you've got these villages that are basically all men, and that leads to social unrest, social instability, plus the fact that these 37 million more men who are marriage age are also military age, so it's an internationally destabilizing influence as well. So that's one demographic problem. The other demographic problem they have is that this population bubble that they experienced under Mao is now heading towards retirement. I call it China's senior tsunami. It is a slow motion demographic disaster because they don't have the young population to sustain them. And they don't have Social Security, and they don't have any plan that I'm aware of. So I'm worried that over the next 10, 20 years, we're going to start seeing some very ugly end-of-life issues arising in China, just like we're seeing very ugly beginning-of-life issues now. So given the fact that they have these 2 demographic problems that have been caused by the one-child policy, why are they continuing it? Now, this is my opinion. Certainly, the Chinese Communist Party has not taken me into their confidence to tell me why they're doing this. Okay. I believe that in the beginning, the one-child policy was instituted as a population control measure, and that the byproduct of this was terror. Of course, it's terrifying to everyone. It's a way to show power that the arm of Beijing is long enough that the Chinese Communist Party can stick its finger into the womb of every woman in China and declare life or death over her baby. That's terrifying. But I think that now, since it makes no demographic and indeed no economic sense for them to continue this, that the purpose of the policy is terror. It's gone from a byproduct to, I believe the primary purpose is terror. And I believe that the reason that they want to terrify their people, and they're using, I'm telling you, these family planning police are like domestic terrorists. I mean, they have these family planning raids. You saw that woman who said, there are people who are looking for me, people like me in the village, and they found me, and I was hiding behind the door, and he didn't see me, otherwise he would have taken me with the rest of them. And you saw those pictures of all those women in this jail-like facility. What they do is they chart who's illegally pregnant, and then they have something called a family planning raid, where they just hit a neighborhood and drag out all the women who are illegally pregnant, take them down to the family planning center, throw them in jail, and then forcibly abort them all. That is terrifying for women and men, and what it does is it also breaks down the relationships of trust in the society, because you can be informed on by anyone. Okay, you can be informed by your family, your friends, your neighbors, your coworker, your supervisor, someone who's watching for you as you walk down the street, watching for people who look a little bit bigger. So if you don't know who you can trust concerning your own your own ability to have a child, then certainly there's no one that you can really trust if you want to band together and try to elect a democracy. So I think that they are doing this as a way to shatter relationships in society and terrorize everyone in order to keep themselves in power. That's my opinion. Yes. How often do I go to China? Never. I mean, if I went to China, can you imagine what would happen to me if they figured out who I was? I mean, I would end up like Chen Guangcheng. And I'm not going to depend on this administration to try to get me out either. So I was in China in the 80s, and the China Aid Association and my own growing network, and also Women's Rights Without Frontiers, we have the biggest, in fact, I think we have the only Chinese website in the world that is exclusively devoted to the one-child policy and Chen Guangcheng. I get my information directly out of China, and I don't need to go to China. My hope is that someday I will go to China, but it's not going to be under the current regime, And actually, I hope that I will die and be buried in China. And if I do, then I know that my life will have been worth living. Yes. Am I ever able to effectively interface with the United Nations? Now, I just met with the congressional representative who is the liaison to the United Nations last week in Washington, D.C., and we are going to try to get the United Nations Conference on the Status of Women, all right, to address this issue and to bring me in there. There is no bigger women's issue in the world than gendercide and forced abortion in China. It affects 1 out of every 3 women in the world when you put China and India together. Now, I spoke at the United Nations sort of a couple years ago. They have the official events, then they have the side events, then they have the side events. I was at a side event, which isn't even on their program. And that is just appalling. This should be spoken about in the General Assembly. Okay, now I have 3 minutes left, so that's time for one last question. Yes. People from within China who are doing that. So if you want to support Chen Guangcheng, sign the petition against forced abortion in China, and send a picture of yourself to me wearing sunglasses, and I'll put you on my website. I think that's all the time I have. Thank you all very much for listening.